Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for the 6th episode of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. Now, those of you that are new to this channel, I've linked the playlist in the description box below so you can catch up and get up to date with the rest of us. Now, the 6th episode is quite poignant, really, because it's really the start of the phony war, and the impact on the princesses is profound. In particular, I was interested to read about how LILIBET reacted, and we are introduced to a new character, a certain Greek prince that totally captures LILIBET's attention. The title of this chapter is called The Outbreak of War. Before the royal family went to Balmoral in August, there came an incident that was going to have very wide results in everybody's life. We went for the weekend to Dartmouth on the King's yacht, the Victorian Albert, on a private visit, for the King wanted to visit Dartmouth College. LILIBET was 13 at this time, and it had been decided to take the princesses and myself there just for a few days. The Victorian Albert was a delightful yacht. It was very Victorian in decor, however. But it was lovely and roomy for the whole family. And Marion Crawford said she shuddered to think how packed in all the sailors were beneath decks, though. She said she thought they would be like sardines. The children and myself had a very pretty little schoolroom which was used by Allah for breakfast and tea and the little girls' supper, but whenever possible we did lessons out on the deck. The dining saloon gave the children a great thrill because the yacht's mast came out and up through one end of the dining table. We had very happy parties around this table for lunch and dinner when we were all together. On private occasions like this, no one could be a pleasanter host and hostess than their majesties. The King and Queen took their own chef down with them, and the ship's officers, accustomed to much harder tack, enjoyed the change, I think. The weather was good, and we all loved the trip. Now, the King was holding an inspection at Dartmouth Royal Naval College where he'd once been a cadet, and interestingly, he looked on the college with great affection. Now, I've read so often that it was just, horrifically strict, as you could imagine, but evidently a lot of people had quite fond memories of it. So although it was strict, it sounds like it was fair, which is good, which is very, very good. On the Sunday morning, we were going to the college because there was going to be a special service. Now, about the time when the service was scheduled to start, someone came out to see the King and Queen and said, "We're awfully sorry, but 2 boys have come down with the mumps." So it was decided that LILIBET and Margaret shouldn't risk going into the chapel where the service was going to be. So they were sent off to Dalrymple Hamilton's house, where the Dalrymple Hamilton family lived in the captain's house at Dartmouth College. The house had a very pleasant lived-in feeling, and the children, a boy and a girl rather older than the princesses, came out to meet us. There was a clockwork railway laid out all over the nursery floor, and we all knelt down to play with it. Cue Philip. We played for ages, and after a time, a fair-haired boy, rather like a Viking, with a sharp face and piercing blue eyes, came in. He was good-looking. Though rather offhand in his manner, he said, "How do you do?" to LILIBET, and for a while they knelt side by side, playing with the trains. He soon got bored with that. We had ginger crackers and lemonade, in which he joined, and then he said, "Let's go to the tennis courts and have some real fun jumping the nets." Off they went. At the tennis courts, I thought he showed off a good deal, but the little girls were very impressed. LILIBET said, "How good is he, Crawfie? How high he can jump." She never took her eyes off him the whole time. He was quite polite to her, but did not pay her any special attention. He spent a lot of time just teasing plump little Margaret. It cracks me up that they're always referring to Margaret as plump and Margaret said in our last chapter, "Look, Mummy, I've lost quite a bit of weight," or I'm paraphrasing, but you know what I mean. And now we're straight back to calling her plump little Margaret again. When we went back to the yacht for lunch, the fair-haired boy was there. He was near LILIBET. We all sat around and talked and laughed a great deal. After that, we went to see the swimming pool, and then it was back to the yacht again. It had started to rain by this time, and we were a bedraggled little party. We had a very jolly dinner that night, but LILIBET was not allowed to stay up. Next day, the fair-haired boy, who turned out to be Prince Philip of Greece, came to lunch again. All eyes were on him, which he obviously enjoyed. Lilibet asked him, "What would you like to eat? What would you like when it came to tea?" The Queen said, "You must make a really good meal, for I suppose it shall last for the day." Philip had several platefuls of shrimps and a banana split, among other trifles. To the little girls, a boy of any kind was always a strange creature out of another world. Lilibet sat pink-faced, enjoying it all very much. To Margaret, anyone who could eat so many shrimps was a hero. In the end, he had to go back to Dartmouth to his classes. Now, they go out into the Channel, and it was a hard manoeuvre to get the yacht out into the Channel, and all the Dartmouth boys were given permission to grab any sort of sailing vessel they could find, or rowing boat, or anything that floated, basically, and follow the royal yacht out to the open sea and wave them off. Well, all the lads did this, and most turned back at a reasonable time. However, the king started to get really, really concerned, and so did the captain of the yacht, because quite a few foolhardy boys were following them far too long, and they were ending up out in the open sea. And the king said, "This is really dangerous. We have to signal for them to go back." So over megaphones, they were telling them to go back, go back. But there was one solitary figure who was rowing away as hard as he could, who, of course, was Philip. He was the last boy following the yacht out to sea. Lilibet took the glasses and had a long look at him. In the end, the king said, "The young fool, he must go back, otherwise we'll have to heave to and send him back." At last, Philip seemed to realise they didn't want him to go back. They wanted him to go back, so they were shouting at him so much through the megaphone. So he turned back, while Lilibet gazed at him until he became a very small speck in the distance. That indeed was rather dangerous. It was out in the open sea. It was amazing. Now, Marion Crawford goes on to say that the little girls didn't realise just how grim everything was and how, war was imminent. And Crawfie said, "When I heard Czechoslovakia had been overrun, Mr. Chamberlain came more and more often, looking harassed and bothered and aging under our eyes. People still asked what Hitler was going to do. Looking back on it, it now seems so obvious that I wonder anyone asked, but we still hoped that some 11th hour change would take place." It was August. London was stifling. People were streaming out of town as usual for their holidays. The royal family usually went away at this time to Balmoral, but their departure was delayed, and the children were horrified at the idea they might not get up there at all. "Who is this Hitler spoiling everything?" Margaret demanded. I think Margaret would have taken on Hitler. I think he would have been quite terrified of her. It was decided I'd better go for my holiday as usual, and I left on the 4th of August, leaving the little girls in London. Our goodbyes were very sad and strained. But in the end, it was decided they would go as usual to Balmoral. So on the 7th of August, I had a triumphant letter from Margaret. "Well, we're here," she wrote. Ella always went with them, and they had the entire charge of the children while I had my holiday. Now, she goes on to say how the royal family used to get up to Scotland, and it was on the royal train. The journey took in all about 14 hours, as the royal train did not allow speed to interfere with comfort. The children's ponies were sent on ahead by ordinary horsebox. Their endless dogs, including the Queen's bad-tempered Dookie, went with them. War was declared on the 3rd of September, and I was still on my holiday when I got a telegram asking if I would come as soon as possible to Birk Hall. I collected my things and caught my train for Birk Hall, wondering what was going to happen. And she says when she got to Birk Hall, the 2 little girls and Ella were waiting for me. They were anxious and very apprehensive about their parents. "Why had Mummy and Papa to go back, Crawfie? Do you think the Germans will come and get them?" Margaret asked me. Now, Lilibet, of course, was always looking after Margaret, and she said to Marion Crawford, "I don't think people should talk about battles and things in front of Margaret," she said. "We don't want to upset her." The King and Queen telephoned through to us every night at 6 o'clock, and the children waited anxiously for the telephone bell to ring. There would be a mad rush. The Queen always had a word with me first. I think they felt it very keenly that at this very distressing time the family had to be separated. Both the Queen and the King were very anxious that the children should be kept as far away as possible from it all. I guess through practical measures too. I mean, Lilibet was the heir. Stick to the usual program as far as you can, Crawfie. We don't know what's coming, of course, but carry on as long as possible, just as usual. I mean, how terrifying. No one in the UK knew what was going to happen. No one in the UK knew when the bombing was going to start. Already they were seeing young men disappear off estates and everything because, they were called up. And, the landscape was changing very much. And already, injured people were coming back on trains. There was now no Mama and Papa to visit in the early morning, so they both came to me very punctually at 9:30. We waited until 11 o'clock and then we had our usual break, coffee and biscuits for me, orange juice and biscuits for the little girls. Then we used to catch George the pony and saddle him up and go for a brisk walk, the children taking it in turns to ride. Everything smelt good, so clean and sweet, and our feet sunk deliciously into moss on either side of the river. I read the newspapers to the children after tea, trying as far as possible to give them a good idea of what was happening without too many horrible details. Hitler seemed to be marching all over the place, and I remember Lilibet saying anxiously, "Oh dear, Crawfie, I hope he won't come over here." One night, over the wireless, we suddenly got the horrible news that brought us slap up against reality. A grave voice regretfully announced the sinking of the battleship Royal Oak. We were studying Jane's fighting ships and the little girls took a personal interest in every one of them. Suddenly Lilibet jumped horrified from her chair, her eyes blazing with anger. I can still hear her little voice. "Crawfie, it can't be! All those nice sailors!" As the situation worsened, it was no longer possible to keep things from them. That really interested me, the reaction of Lilibet. I think she really was destined to be queen. Her first thought was for the sailors lost and the anger, the flash of anger in her eyes. She was just perfect for the role, wasn't she? Just absolutely perfect. We organised war work. Everyone else was occupied in some way and the little girls could not wait to do their share. So I organised a large sewing party to meet every Thursday afternoon in the schoolroom at Burke Hall. For these gatherings, Arlo was hostess. We gave them all tea, sandwiches, dropped scones, a sort of Scotch pancake, jam and fruit cake. Rationing and shortages had not begun, and later when they did, everyone had to bring their own sugar or a contribution like their own cake or scones because everyone had to, sort of take part. When later evacuees from Glasgow were sent out to the village, their mothers also joined us. The King opened up a large house on the Balmoral estate for evacuees, where they lived in gorgeous surroundings. But Crawfie said not many of them actually appreciated it because they were terrified of silence. They were actually scared to go into the woods and they were frightened if they saw a deer. They were also not noticeably clean, and I think the conditions of some of these people came as a great shock to our honest, God-fearing country folk. These weekly meetings were very popular in the district, and Lilibet and Margaret handed around teacups and cake and talked away happily to the various women, asking fondly about their departed sons and fathers. Aberdeenshire is the country of the Gordon Highlanders, and most of them were recruited there. Already most of the farms had an empty place, and one by one the gardeners and the keepers began to disappear. Weeds sprung up where before no weeds had been seen. The housemaids would sadly tell us of this or that male relative whisked away. Soon out of doors, one old man would be doing the work of 2 or 3 younger ones who had been called up. Beyond an occasional trip to the dentist in Aberdeen, the children had few outings, and so these trips took on an air of great treats. There was no bombing up there. We seemed to be at the moment in a different and very peaceful world. The beautiful autumn days passed and brought the first white frosts on the stubble fields. The hares, golden brown all summer, began to put on their winter coats of white. The wild geese began to come down to the rivers and streams again. We had to begin to think about Christmas, but not with the usual pleasure and excitement, as none of us knew what was going to happen. Now, the children had never been in Scotland for a winter before, so all this was quite amazing to them, the changes. There was no central heating in our bedrooms at Birk Hall, and the water in the drinking carafes was often frozen hard, together with the children's sponges and flannels, which delighted them immensely. They were never daunted by things like this, and they made nothing at all of any discomfort. Just before Christmas, I felt we should make some sort of preparation, so I took them to Woolworths at Aberdeen, where we did some brisk shopping and invested in the sixpenny china ornaments and brochures, which usually made the bulk of their Christmas shopping. Lilibet and Margaret joined the local Girl Guide company meetings taking place in the village hall. We arranged hikes and tea parties and outings, bringing in the evacuees. All this helped to get the children from missing their parents too much. Now, she goes on to describe that they had visitors at Birk Hall that would arrive and they'd be friends of their parents, and often gentlemen would be quite terrified of Margaret because she had such a sharp tongue, even at that age. Poor little Margaret. The misunderstanding of her light-hearted fun and frolics was often to get her into trouble long after her schoolroom days were gone. She had great gifts and genius and was always a little uncomfortable at court. She could have made a name for herself as an artist, a singer, a dancer. Like all young girls, she went through a phase where she could be extremely tiresome. She would dawdle over her dressing, pleased to know she was keeping us waiting. I cured her of this foible by going off with Lilibet and the pony and leaving her behind. Good on you, Crawfie. If Crawfie had have been with her later in life, she probably would have done a bit better, I think. Christmas drew nearer, the first Christmas of the war none of us will ever forget. I've got to interject here and explain, because I've seen a lot of comments actually where people telling me that I've got the wrong idea about Margaret. Quite possibly, but my personal opinion of Margaret was formed from actually reading a lot of books where first-person accounts of her behaviour towards other people were shared, and they were often really reliable accounts, like Lady Glenconner's books. And often, what was described, even though Lady Glenconner was very sympathetic to Margaret and considered her her very close friend and always made excuses for her, I found the way she treated other people often bullying and appalling, and I didn't like her behaviour. I can't abide a bully. And so that's where I formed my personal opinion. Christmas drew nearer, the first Christmas of the war none of us will ever forget. There was still no definite news of what was to happen to us and whether the children would be allowed to go to London or not. If they remained in Scotland, I knew I must give up any hopes of spending Christmas at my own home with her mother. Then on the 18th of December, the telephone rang. I picked up the receiver and my heart gave a great thump, for I heard the Queen's voice. It sounded in that moment quite bright and gay and young again. "Crawfie, all's well. We're going to spend Christmas at Sandringham as usual." There were shouts of joy from the children. "And you," the Queen continued, "can go home and join us later." And then there were shouts of joy from Crawfie. Then we all kissed very fondly, and they said, you will come back though, won't you, when Mummy wants you?" Now, she makes a really profound point here. Having Christmas at Sandringham was a piece of courage that has been overlooked, for Sandringham was on the east coast, very handy for German bombs. To date, none had fallen, but there was no guarantee they would not come. After the collapse of Poland, the phony war was in full swing, but on the air was an unpleasant sensation of waiting for worse to come. The Christmas routine at Sandringham was the same year after year. The children would have resented any change in it. As of old, they'd objected to my altering a single word in any familiar and loved story. The Christmas tree was always lit on Christmas Eve, a custom which I believe came from Germany, Christmas dinner being the high spot of the Christmas day. Everyone had his own table with his presents laid out. The housekeeper had found out beforehand what the maids hoped for. The steward had done the same with the manservants. The King and Queen shook hands with every member of their staff after the present giving. Before the war, the household got whatever they wished for. It got very austere during the war and after the war. It just wasn't ever the same again, according to all the staff. The Christmas of 1939 was to be the last of the familiar Christmases for some time, but no one knew it then. Then I got a wire from the Queen. Please come to Royal Lodge. Can you come on the 5th, which was the 5th of February? I went to Royal Lodge and found the children there, and we remained until the 12th of May 1940. Between February and May at Royal Lodge, we had a really happy time. You couldn't be anything else but fairly happy there. There weren't the anxious faces one would see in London. Now, it was around this time that it was discussed that the princesses should go. It was even discussed in the Parliament that the princesses should go off for safety to avoid the bombing. And the Queen then said this very famous quote, which I think sort of had a lot of dignity and bravery. "The children could not go without me," the Queen said simply, "and I could not possibly leave the King." We joined up again with the Girls' Guides Company and got the village children and the evacuees to join up too. In the village school, there are about 30 evacuee children from the East End of London, and we'd all become very good friends. And like most real Cockneys, these East End children were easy to get on with and made nothing at all of their sudden changed surroundings. But I think what they loved most was the delicious meals we provided for them at picnics, and they enjoyed the long hikes with us in the woods. At Royal Lodge, we got the schoolroom routine going once again. There were numerous other children staying in and around Windsor, and I got a dancing class up for all of them, which was held once a week. We kept it for little girls only, as the princesses did not understand the antics of little boys, and this did not seem to be the moment to try to teach them. Miss Ficini, a famous London dancing mistress, used to come out to us there. The little girls came out with their nannies wearing their party frocks, and afterwards we'd give them tea. It made a bright break in those gloomy war days. Lilibet resumed her lessons with Sir Henry Martin at Eton College. As we came and went through the crowded quadrangle, I often wondered sadly how many of those boys we saw there would come through the war years. A great many of them never did. So a very poignant ending to chapter 6. The next chapter is A House in the Country, which of course is chapter 7. I found that a really moving chapter, did you? Particularly the ending really brings home the fear they must have felt. And of course, Lilibet and Princess Margaret would have been very aware that if Hitler did invade the UK, that a real clear target would have been the King and Queen, their mum and dad. So I'm sure there was a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe and share if you enjoy these book chats, and I'll be back next Friday with another one. Also, this is going up Good Friday, so I hope that you have a really, really happy Easter weekend. Enjoy all that chocolate on Sunday. See you. Bye.